Going on, guys? Welcome back. Episode 19 of the Next Season podcast. Being an athlete is pretty damn awesome. You get to train, you get to compete, you get to travel and see different parts of the world. You get to meet tons of cool people. And if you're fortunate enough to advance in your career, you can make a really nice living from your talent and your effort and your ambition and, of course, your mindset. Being an athlete has so many benefits for your mind, for your body, and for just fulfillment and enjoyment in life. There's too many to list, but I'll list a few. Athletics can improve your physical health and well-being, of course. It can build grit and mental stamina and develop teamwork and leadership skills. It can give you a sense of purpose. And the lessons that you learn from sports and athletic training are universally transferable to every other life pursuit. And specifically for brain and cognitive performance, in episode 18, I laid out 6 mental superpowers that athletes have. Our brains are trained to perform under pressure, to push through fatigue, and to thrive in pressure situations in competition. But like everything in life, it's not all puppies and ice cream. There are challenges and obstacles, inner struggles, and mental resistance that athletes must battle every single day. It can be tough. And we face these challenges in ways that many people don't and maybe can't fully understand. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by expectations and pressure, you've struggled to handle criticism and judgment, if you've ever felt lost without the game in your life, this episode is for you. And this is yet another episode that I could have used when I played, because every single one of these are challenges that I faced and I didn't know how to handle them. And they beat me. And I want it to be a different story for you. So today I'm going to break down 5 of the biggest mental challenges that athletes face, talk about what's happening in your brain when you experience them, and most importantly, what you can do to overcome them. Just like I did for the last episode on the superpowers, I'm focusing on the mental side, not as much on the physical side. So for example, as an athlete, of course, you've got an increased risk of concussions and brain injuries. Obviously, that has mental and neural impact, but I'm going to put that in the physical category. The same with risk of poor sleep quality, right? That's a physical thing, has mental and cognitive implications, but it's in the physical category. I also want to keep this episode different from episodes 11 and 12. In those 2 episodes, I address common pain points and questions from parents and coaches. I'm going to do more of those, and they are certainly similar topics. So I'm going to link to that playlist so you can hear some of the specific questions and challenges that are common among baseball players. Before we get to the top 5, there are a bunch that I'm not going to include in this list, but they are very real for athletes. I don't want this to be a 2-hour podcast. I don't want to keep you here all day, but they are important. And so real quick, here are a few that didn't make the cut. Performance anxiety and fear of failure, which could lead to serious anxiety and risk avoidance and those fight, flight, or freeze responses. Struggling with what I call the next play mentality. So it's getting stuck over analyzing mistakes or the past instead of quickly resetting and moving forward. Difficulty slowing down and resting. That drive to improve can make athletes struggle taking breaks, which can lead to physical and mental overtraining, which can then lead to risk of burnout. And finally, struggles with normal social interactions. That high commitment to your training can create isolation and create feelings where you struggle in what could be considered normal interactions. So if those didn't make the cut, and they're big ones, what did? Like I said, I whittled it down to my top 5, and I want to focus on ones that you may not hear talked about enough. And make sure you watch to the end, because number 5 is one that will impact you for life. These are all important, but to me, that's the big one. So if you're ready to rock, let's go. Number 1, increased pressure and expectations. It's the weight of always having to perform. Pressure is an unavoidable part of being an athlete. From the moment you step on the field, you're being judged. Athletes live under constant evaluation and scrutiny by coaches, by teammates, by parents, by fans, by scouts, by media, even themselves. Every game and every at-bat and every play can feel like it's defining your future. You think about it, right? You're a pitcher in a big game. It's not about just throwing a pitch or throwing a baseball. You're throwing a pitch with the weight of your team, your coach's approval, the game, the series, the season on you. Your chance at a scholarship, right? Your draft stock. or even a contract could be riding on that. One mistake, miss a few inches and leave it out over the plate or spike a curve into the dirt, and that's it. It can feel like the end of the world. The pressure doesn't just come from the outside either. The hardest expectations to meet are often the ones that you put on yourself. Maybe you were always the best player on your team growing up, and now you feel like you have to prove you still belong at every level. Maybe you set a goal, right? A D1 scholarship or all state or all conference selection or a pro contract. And now anything less than that can feel like failure. Athletes don't just play the game, they live in it. And because of that, the pressure never really turns off. And too much pressure can turn into stress, anxiety, and burnout. Have you ever had a game where you wanted it too much, right? You felt so much pressure to perform that you couldn't get out of your own head. So maybe you're overthinking a routine ground ball and then suddenly boot it. Or you want to get the guy out so bad that you try a throw when you should have just put it in your pocket. Maybe you freeze in a big at bat and you're unable to pull the trigger. Or you want so bad to come through with that big hit that you start chasing out of your zone and you don't stay disciplined in your approach. Maybe you can't sleep before a game because your mind is racing with all the what ifs. The irony is that the more that you stress about performing, the worse you actually perform. Pressure makes you tight instead of loose, hesitant instead of aggressive. And it turns the game from something that you love into something that you dread. And when that pressure is constant, it wears you down. You're putting in the work, but you're not enjoying it anymore. You're not enjoying the process. You're not enjoying the competition. And that's how players burn out. It's not because they stop caring. It's because they care so much they can't escape it. That's what happened to me. So what's happening in the brain when you feel this, right? When you feel this pressure, your amygdala, which is the fear center of your brain, kicks into overdrive. And this is your fight or flight or freeze response. And in survival situations, this is great. This is what you need. It's what makes you react fast when danger is near. But in sports, it's a problem. The amygdala fires up, making you feel anxious and stressed and tense. Your prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking side of your brain, shuts down and makes it harder to focus, to make decisions, and to stay in the moment. Of course, then cortisol, which is the stress hormone, spikes, and that can actually help you dial in. But if it stays too high for too long, it drains your energy, it slows your reaction time, and it's going to kill your performance. Remember, cortisol is not bad. Stress is not bad. It's actually necessary for peak performance. It's required for growth, and it helps you with attention and focus during pressure moments. But when that game is over, you need to be able to let go and phase out of that stress state, that sympathetic state, and into the relaxed state, which is the parasympathetic state. So how do you do this? How do you address this pressure? The first thing you can do is reframe pressure as privilege. Pressure means that you're in a position that matters. Instead of thinking, I have to perform, I have to do this, shift it to, I get to. I get to perform. I get to come up to the plate in a key moment. Instead of thinking, don't mess this up, tell yourself, I trained for this. This is what I want. The best athletes embrace pressure instead of fearing it. They treat it as fuel, not as fear. Second thing you can do, of course, as we always say, is breathe. Your nervous system can't tell the difference between a real threat, such as a bear or a lion chasing you, and a perceived threat, striking out a big moment. Not the end of the world. You're not going to die. And that's why a breathing practice is so powerful. It tells your brain, hey, I'm okay. I'm okay. So try box breathing, right? Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold it for 4 seconds. Exhale for 4 seconds. And hold that for 4 seconds. And that's going to lower your cortisol and calm the nervous system. You repeat that cycle and lower your heart rate, lower your cortisol. Before stepping in the batter's box, before making a play, before a big pitch, can reset your mind and your body almost instantly. And then the third thing you can do is create a reset routine. Very similar to this, but the best athletes have a pregame and in-game reset routine to help keep your emotions in check. So before each game, maybe it's a song, maybe it's a certain process that you go through to get in that right frame of mind. In-game, every small action is an opportunity to clear your mind after a mistake. Again, breathing, maybe it's tapping the plate, maybe it's adjusting batting gloves, maybe it's taking your hat off and just looking at something. There's a whole bunch of different things that athletes do to create a reset, a mental and physical reset in the moment. Remember, pressure is a privilege. It's proof that you get to do something that matters. It's part of the game. The best athletes don't run from it. They embrace it and they manage it. It's not about getting rid of nerves. It's about knowing how to use them. The second challenge that athletes face is heightened exposure to criticism. JFK once said, "Too often we enjoy the comfort of opinion without the discomfort of thought." It's a powerful quote, but I'm going to add to it for those who judge athletes. It's also the discomfort of disciplined training and competition. You don't just compete against opponents. You compete under a microscope. Every performance, every play, every mistake is judged. We just talked about this in the pressure and expectations one. It's constantly judged by coaches, by parents, by teammates, and fans, social media, and sports analysts, often from people who haven't played a game since Little League, if at all. If you have a great game, people cheer, coaches praise, social media hypes you up. But if you have a bad game, suddenly you're trash, you're overrated, you're soft. Some random dude with 13 followers is calling you a bum and breaking down why you should be cut from the team. And that's just the destructive criticism, right? That noise that comes from being in the public eye. But even constructive criticism, coaching and feedback from teammates can feel overwhelming when you're already your own biggest critic. Some athletes struggle to separate that feedback, that constructive criticism, from the destructive criticism, and it impacts your personal worth and your growth. When every piece of feedback and every piece of criticism feels like an attack, improvement becomes nearly impossible. And this constant pressure and this constant exposure to judgment affects athletes in a few major ways. First of all, it creates fear of making mistakes. If every error and every mistake that you make, every swing and miss, every bad pitch leads to public scrutiny, you start playing scared. You avoid risks, you hesitate in big moments, and you lose your edge. It makes you defensive in response to coaching, right? So it makes you reluctant to receive coaching or even seek it out. Instead of using feedback to improve, you take it personally and you feel attacked and you shut down instead of making the adjustments. And then, of course, there's a loss of confidence and passion. The game starts to feel like a job, and every performance is a test, and you're just trying not to fail. Social media makes this even worse. One bad game can mean thousands of comments and memes and posts dissecting your performance, and it's relentless. And this is what the youth of today is exposed to. When school and practice or the game ends, opinions don't. They follow you in group chats and DMs, Instagram posts and tweets. It wasn't always like this. When I was a kid and even into college, we didn't have social media. If we had a bad game, if you had stuff going on in school, you went home. The criticism ended when you left the field or when you got on the bus at the end of the day. Now, there's no off switch. The pressure and the comparisons and the judgments is 24/7. And that's a massive shift. And it's part of why mental health struggles are increasing in youth athletes. That's not to say that social media is all bad. The connections and the exposure and the opportunities it creates can be incredible. But without boundaries, it's a constant mental drain. So let's talk about what's happening in the brain. When we have criticism, especially public criticism, it triggers a cascade of neurological responses. So dopamine drops, which tanks our motivation, and the joy of the game starts to fade. The prefrontal cortex is overridden, and instead of processing criticism logically, you react emotionally. The amygdala, again, that fear center, fires back up again, and your brain perceives criticism as a threat, creating that fight, flight, or freeze response, stress, anxiety, emotional distress. And when that stress is chronic, if you're constantly under judgment, your brain stays in a constant fight or flight state, leading to burnout and mental fatigue. And this is why criticism today could hit differently than it did in previous generations. That constant connectivity keeps athletes in perpetual stress. And if you don't learn to manage it, it's going to eat you alive. So what can you do? First of all, separate yourself from your performance. You are not your stats. Your identity is not tied to your last game. A bad game doesn't make you a bad athlete. One bad play doesn't make you a failure. It doesn't define you. If your identity is only tied to your performance, every setback is going to feel like a failure. The best athletes zoom out. They see their career as a long game, not just a single moment. Another thing you can do is use the 24-hour rule. After a game, give yourself 24 hours before you react emotionally to feedback. Whether that's a coach's critique, social media comment, or even your own frustration, give yourself space, wait. Emotion often distorts reality. And what feels like the end of the world right after a game usually feels different the next day, especially after sleep. Another thing you can do is reframe criticism as data. It's just information. Instead of thinking I'm being attacked, reframe it as this is something that I can use to improve. Remember, not all criticism is valuable, but the right kind from the right people can be a game changer. Learn to filter. If the feedback is coming from somebody who knows the game and has your best interest and cares about you personally, listen to them. If it's coming from some internet troll, let it go. Doesn't matter. Another thing you can do is create boundaries and friction around stressors. You want to protect your mental game by controlling when and how you expose yourself to that criticism. So before a game, avoid social media, negative conversations, or anything else that puts doubt into your mind. Before a game, you don't need it. After a game, don't immediately go check social media or engage in heated discussions. Give yourself time to cool down and process it yourself. A lot of high-level athletes have a simple rule. They don't read the comments. It's not because they're arrogant. It's not because they don't care. It's because they know it's mostly crap. If you're chasing big goals, people are going to have opinions. You can't control what they say, but you can control how you respond and how you proactively put your boundaries up. At the end of the day, the only voices that truly matter are the ones that push you forward, not the ones who are trying to tear you down. Learn to filter the noise and keep playing the game with humility and a coachable mindset. The third mental struggle or challenge that athletes have is mental fatigue from constant competition. Playing sports isn't just physically demanding, it's mentally exhausting. And it's not just the practices and the workouts and the games, it's the constant thinking and analyzing and preparing and the balancing of school and practice and everything else that's going on in life. Your mind is always in the game, even when you're not on the field. You're watching film, that's mental reps. If you're breaking down your last game, that's mental reps. If you're visualizing, that's mental reps. If you're thinking about what you need to fix, who you're competing against, pitcher tendencies, what's next, that's even more mental reps. And unlike other professions where people can clock out at the end of the day, athletes don't have an off switch. Even in the off season, the pressure is there. Am I improving? Am I staying sharp? Is my competition outworking me? This kind of constant engagement drains your mental energy, just like physical training drains your body. This is why mental skills training is so important and growing in sports in every level. Here's how it impacts athletes. Mental fatigue can creep in quietly, but its effects are massive. So chronic exhaustion, you feel tired all the time, even if you know you're getting enough sleep. Brain fog, right? You're struggling to focus, you're struggling to process information and make quick decisions. If you feel a lack of motivation, you're starting to feel burned out. The sport that you love starts to feel like a chore. Decision fatigue, simple choices, like if just a simple question of should I do this or that? Where are we going to eat? What am I going to wear? Those simple choices can feel overwhelming and your reaction time starts to slow down. The game's moving faster than you can think. And then mental errors and key moments. If you ever had a moment where you know what to do, but your brain just doesn't react in time, that's mental fatigue. Athletes don't realize how much this matters until it starts costing them. And that extra split second of hesitation can be the difference between a clutch play and a mistake. And the worst part, pushing through, just plowing through like athletes have a tendency to do, doesn't always fix it. So what's happening in the brain? Well, your brain only makes up about 2% of your body weight, but it consumes about 20% of your body's total energy at rest. I'm going to say this again. Your brain makes up about 2% of your body weight, but it consumes roughly 20% of your body's caloric consumption. So thinking burns calories. Mental activity, decision making, stress can increase glucose and oxygen demand. And this is why deep focus and concentration and intense cognitive work can leave you feeling physically drained. During high cognitive load, like, you've got finals week, you got a lot going on at school or at home, in the midst of preparing for competition and preparing for the game, your brain's energy consumption is going to spike. And that's going to deplete the neurotransmitters like dopamine and acetylcholine, leading to mental exhaustion. The prefrontal cortex gets overworked. This is the part of your brain responsible for decision making and problem solving. It's the CEO of your brain, right? All of that stuff and focus and everything else. And when that's overworked, you start getting sloppy. You start making mistakes that you wouldn't normally make. And there's something else called glutamate, and glutamate starts to build up. Your brain uses glutamate for focus and cognitive function, but too much of it leads to mental fatigue and burnout. So if you think of it like a phone battery, if you keep running all of your apps 24/7 without ever closing them, your phone is going to start to lag and maybe even overheat. Your brain works the same way. It needs time to shut down and to reset. That mental fatigue can impact physical performance. When you drain your mental resources without recharging, even those simple tasks can start to feel overwhelming. So, how do you address it? Schedule mental recovery days. Okay, just like your body needs physical rest days, your brain needs time to recover too. So, take a break from film study, take a break from scouting reports, take a break from strategy sessions, step away from constantly analyzing your performance. This doesn't mean that you're slacking off, it means you're giving your mind space to breathe. Second thing you can do is use active recovery for the mind. So have those days off, but then also have active recovery. So instead of having high cognitive load and it, like I said, taking a break from all those things, maybe you do some meditation. Maybe you do some visualization, help to lower that stress and improve focus, right? Instead of grinding over mistakes, visualize success. The cool part about visualization is it's proven, specifically studies in sports, to activate the same brain regions as physical practice. So if you're physically tired and you don't want to go through, or maybe you don't have access to the equipment, visualization can be a great supplemental tool to improve your physical performance. Creative outlets, right? Playing music, writing, drawing, painting, even just listening to a podcast or listening to something fun is going to give your brain a break and allow it to actively recharge. And then the third thing you can do, certainly the biggest, is prioritize sleep. Quality sleep isn't about resting your body. It's the number one way for your brain to restore function, to process learning, and to truly rest. Sleep is when your brain clears out all of that glutamate buildup and resets your prefrontal cortex. So all the things that are happening in your brain when you're elevated stress and your elevated anxiety and all that glutamate buildup, the sleep shuts it down. Studies show that athletes who get less than 6 hours of sleep have slower reaction times and make more mistakes. Good sleep equals faster decision making, better memory, and stronger performance under pressure. You wouldn't train without rest days. You'd break down. Your brain works the same way. The best athletes train smarter, not just harder. That means you know when to push and you know when to recover. This is not to say that you don't push through and do hard things. It's not to say that you don't push yourself to the limit sometimes, but you understand when to push and when to pull back. If you ignore mental fatigue, it's going to catch up to you. But if you manage it, you're going to stay sharper, you're going to react faster, and you're going to perform at your peak when it matters most. The fourth mental struggle or challenge that athletes face is over-reliance on routine and structure. We've all heard the great Mike Tyson quote, "Everyone has a great fight plan until they get punched in the face." Athletes thrive in structured environments, practices, weightlifting sessions, training sessions, film study, meals, recovery time, game days, stretching, pre-game routines, right? It's all on a strict schedule, sometimes down to the second. And this structure isn't just a preference, it's necessity for peak performance. Every day is planned down to the minute, and success depends on following that regimen. But when that structure is suddenly removed, whether that's an injury, an illness, the off season, many athletes struggle with feeling lost or unmotivated outside of that sport. If you're someone who needs routine to perform, what's going to happen when your bus gets a flat tire on the way to the game and your team arrives just in time to start? Or you weren't scheduled to pitch, but 10 minutes before the game, your starter's elbow flares up and now you're going to the bump. Or you studied the pitcher's tendencies and you learned from your previous at bat, you're locked in, you're ready, but when you come up to the dish, they're bringing a lights out reliever. Or you were out late, and when you walk into your 8 a.m. class, there's a pop quiz. I could go on. And all of these are unexpected hurdles that take us out of our routine and structure. And if you're not able to handle them in stride and still perform, you're going to have a rough go. Many athletes struggle with spontaneity, adaptability, and self-motivation when there's no clear schedule or immediate goal. And this can lead to procrastination, lack of motivation, or even self-doubt. Because for years, success was built within a structured system. And now, without it, what do? So what's happening in the brain? The basal ganglia which controls habits and routines, gets wired for strict daily schedules. And when those schedules disappear, the brain struggles to adjust. So those dopamine levels drop, leading to a lack of motivation and drive. The brain craves that predictability because it associates routines with rewards and success. We can call it cognitive rigidity, meaning the brain becomes so accustomed to structure that it resists change, making adaptability harder. And I talk about this in episode 7 in the effort pillar. The third brick of the effort pillar is small ball. And part of small ball is what I call adaptive routines. You cannot rely on perfect conditions all the time. So what's important is to be directionally consistent so you don't fall into the trap of a rigid routine. The result is plateaus or you freeze. So it's like a deer in headlights when something inevitably goes sideways. So what can you do? One of the first things you can do is create new routines outside of sports. So if your brain needs structure, do it outside of sports. Build new habits around fitness, about learning, about skill development, personal growth, relationships, something fun, artistic. Create routines around that so you still have that routine, but it's not so closely associated or tied to your sport and your performance. Second thing you can do is embrace uncertainty and adaptability. Life is a game. You don't always know what the next play is going to be. You need to be able to adjust on the fly. The best athletes are adaptable, whether it's adjusting to a new pitcher, a defensive shift, a last-minute lineup change. Train your mind to see unexpected changes as opportunities, not as threats. To take this even further, make notes, journal this stuff, journal all of the times that something didn't go to plan and how you handled it. This is building the awareness and stacking the evidence of your adaptability and your resilience and your tenacity. And then you can recall these times when it happens again, something goes sideways, something change of plans, and you give yourself the confidence in your ability to perform when you're not able to use your routine. Athletes are built for structure, but life isn't always structured. The best performers aren't just the ones who can follow a plan, they're the ones who can adapt when the plan changes. So train your mind to thrive in any situation, make note of it, and you're going to stay ahead of the competition on and off the field. You're not going to be successful from your routine. You're going to be successful when you're able to perform when the routine disappears. Now for number 5. And for me, this challenge is the big one. And it's identity foreclosure or post-career transition challenges. What does this mean? From the time you were a kid, people called you a baseball player. It's how you introduced yourself, how people saw you, and maybe even how you saw yourself. And for years, your entire life revolved around the sport, training, games, off-season, nutrition, sleep, friendships. They're all shaped by baseball. Problem is when that game ends, whether that's due to an injury or retirement or just the natural end of a career, what's left? And many athletes define themselves solely as a baseball player instead of a person who plays baseball. And they struggle because they've built their entire identity around one thing. And when that one thing is gone, so is their sense of purpose. That loss of purpose can lead to depression and anxiety, struggling to find passion outside of sports. It's feeling like you peaked too early. It's feeling like your best days are behind you and you don't have anything else to look forward to. You've probably seen retired athletes that fall into bad habits, whether that's letting go of themselves physically or struggling financially or chasing an adrenaline rush in the wrong ways. It's often because they've never built a post-sports plan while they were playing. And you don't have to be a professional athlete to experience this. I wasn't. And I still felt that drag of what's next? What's left? An absolutely awful and tragic example of this just happened recently. Brian Mattis was a pitcher for the Orioles and a few other teams. He was a first-round pick. He was a top prospect out of college, came to the bigs as a starter with a ton of upside, and eventually found himself as one of the game's best relievers. He had a solid career, and I never knew him, but from all accounts, he was a great guy. He was involved in the community, involved with schools and local hospitals, just seemed like a solid guy. And earlier this year, he was found dead. And I didn't know him, and I wasn't there, so I don't have firsthand knowledge, but just going off the reports, I'm going to keep this very limited, okay? But the reports are that he really struggled post-career and became depressed and a heavy drug user. And that's ultimately what killed him. And he allegedly told loved ones that he used to have it all, but not anymore. That's just gut wrenching. And he's not alone. Even if these stories don't end for others like they did for Brian, the struggles can be very, very difficult. And even if you're still alive, you kind of feel dead inside. So what's happening in the brain? The brain wires identity to repetitive experiences. If you spent years reinforcing, I am a baseball player, that becomes your reality. And the dopamine reward system is used to getting hits from competition and winning and achieving. And when that disappears, so does a major source of fulfillment. The brain resists change. It doesn't like that uncertainty. We just talked about this in the structure and routines. When that structure of baseball and the routine of life around baseball is gone, it can feel like it's free falling without a parachute. Imagine spending 20 years of training for one thing only to wake up and realize it's over. That's a massive neurological shift. So no more pregame routines, no more locker room banter, no more structured schedule. Your brain is looking for something to replace it. But if you haven't prepared, it's like hitting a wall at full speed. So what do? First, develop interests outside of sports before you're done playing. Start exploring passions before your career ends. Plan for the next chapter of life. Get into coaching, start a business, get into fitness, do broadcasting, entrepreneurship. Find something that lights you up outside of just playing the game. Redefine your identity. Instead of saying I'm a baseball player, say I'm a competitor, I'm a leader, I'm a mentor, I'm a student of the game, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a friend, I'm a believer. I am someone who thrives under pressure. Baseball is what you do. It is not who you are. And the best athletes understand that their sport is just one part of their story. It's not the whole thing. Your mindset and discipline and resilience don't go away just because you stop playing. You can apply those same strengths to business, to relationships, to coaching, or any other pursuit. This is the meaning of the name next season. This is why I call it next season, because as long as you have the right mindset and identity, there's always another game to play. There's always another season. Just process the past, perform in the present, and prepare for the next, whatever that next is. So just quick closing thoughts. Pressure is a privilege. You get to do this. You can choose which opinions you listen to. It's okay to rest. Life's going to punch you in the face, so learn to adapt. Process, perform, prepare. There's always a next. These are words that I try to remind myself every single day. When I do these podcasts and I'm saying you and I'm talking to you, I'm talking to me too. Being an athlete is incredibly rewarding and can be an unbelievable journey, but it's also incredibly taxing. Recognize this, embrace it, stay humble and stay disciplined, and you'll be able to be an athlete for life. If you like this episode, do me a favor, like and comment, help us more players find this, share it with a teammate who needs to hear it. Leave a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. Follow me on Instagram for daily tips and resources. Subscribe to the YouTube channel so you don't miss what's next. Head over to my website for free resources to stay in the loop and to learn about my coaching programs. And don't forget, I'd love to hear from you. So shoot me a message, share your takeaways or what you want me to cover next. Appreciate you. See you next time.